I expect that regardless of the outcome of the US elections in November, that the US will remain a staunch and committed NATO ally.
Even when you have a potential president saying that he would not come to your rescue?
Because it is in the security interest of the United States to have a strong NATO. The United States is stronger and safer with more than 30 friends and allies. Russia, China has nothing like the US has in NATO. Second, it is strong bipartisan support for NATO in US. And thirdly, the criticism has not mainly been about NATO, but about NATO allies not spending enough on NATO. And that is now changing. European allies are really stepping up.
I will also want to get your thoughts on the level of threat that Russia poses to Europe. You have the Danes saying that it's realistic that Russia could attack in 3 to 5 years. Does the information that you have also suggest the same?
We don't see any imminent threat against any NATO ally, but of course we can never take peace for granted, and that's exactly why NATO since 2014, since Russia illegally annexed Crimea, have implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense since the end of the Cold War, with more forces, higher readiness, combat troops in the eastern part of the alliance, and now also significant increased spending. And that's to leave no room for miscalculation in Moscow about our ability to defend all allies.
But what is the level of threat that Russia poses? How would you describe that, even if there's no imminent threat?
Well, we have seen a pattern of behavior where Russia is using military force against neighbors. In Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014, and then again a full-fledged invasion in 2022. But that's exactly why we need NATO. And the whole idea of NATO is that an attack on one will be an attack on all. And we represent 50% of the world's military might. So as long as we stand together and are committed to our collective defense, there will be no attack on any NATO ally.
The US is also saying that there's a risk in space, that Russia could take further steps to attack the United States satellites in space. What do you say about this, and how big of a threat is this?
Well, I'll leave it to the United States to go into those specific reports, but in general I can say that of course we are aware of that there are also challenges and threats in space. And therefore NATO has created space as a military domain. The capabilities in space are important for what we can do here on Earth. Communications, detection of missiles, targeting, all of that is dependent on satellites and other capabilities in space. So space is one of the dimensions that NATO has addressed for many years, because we need to also protect capabilities there.
So is it feasible to expect also a war there?
I will not speculate about exactly what kind of conflict we can see, but all dimensions are relevant. Also land, sea, air, but also cyber and space. And that's the reason why NATO is prepared to defend all allies against any threat in any domain.
There's also comments in the United States that Trump could actually withdraw the United States from NATO. What would be the damage to the broader alliance if the US were to consider that?
First of all, I don't think it will happen. What we have seen over the previous US administrations, Republican and Democrat, is that actually the US has increased its military presence in Europe, and it will really violate fundamental US security interests. We have to remember that it makes US stronger. In the United States, you are concerned about the size of China. US represents 25% of the world's GDP. Together with NATO allies, we represent 50% of the world's GDP and 50% of the world's military might. So as long as we stand together, we are safe, and that is also the case for the United States.
We don't have much time left, but when I think about your role and I think about the conversations with the United States, with Ukraine, I'm just wondering what keeps you up at night? What concerns you the most?
That is that we are not able to stand united. So therefore my main task has been to ensure that despite the differences, despite that we are more than 30 allies from both sides of the Atlantic with different political parties disagreeing on many issues, we have always been able to unite around our core task, one for all for one. And as long as we do that, we will preserve peace and prevent any armed military attack against the NATO allies.
But Trump is posing a challenge to that unity.
Again, as I said, regardless of the outcome of the US elections, I expect the US to remain a staunch NATO ally because it is an advantage for the United States. We have to remember that the United States have never fought the war alone. From the Korea War to the war in Afghanistan, NATO allies have been there together with the United States. And in Afghanistan, the only time we invoked our collective defense clause was after an attack on the United States. And hundreds of thousands of European and Canadian soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder with the US soldiers, and many of the European and Canadian soldiers paid the ultimate price. So the US is stronger with NATO.
And just finally, we got obviously the news yesterday that Alexei Navalny has passed away. Does that put even more pressure on you to get all of the NATO allies together?
The best way to honor the memory of Alexei Navalny is to ensure that President Putin does not win in Ukraine. And Russia has some serious questions to answer. Alexei Navalny was in the custody of Russia, the Russian authorities. He was in a Russian prison. He was unjustly arrested and brutally poisoned. So essentially, he was sentenced to death because he opposed President Putin. And now we are tested, and we don't want to live in a world where opponents are killed and neighbors are attacked, as we see in Ukraine. So support Ukraine is the best way to honor the memory of Alexei Navalny.
So you feel more pressure now in the wake of these news?
I feel that the death of Alexei Navalny has demonstrated the importance of standing up for our democratic values and stand up against the authoritarian regime that President Putin represents.